They said heroes are brave men who fight for their country. I was 12 when I learned that heroes also lie, and sometimes that lie ruins everything. I hadn't planned to lie that morning. My voice cracked when I spoke. My boots were 2 sizes too big, and the rifle posters outside the recruitment hall looked heavier than I was. But when the man behind the desk asked my age, the words came out like a reflex. 18, sir. He didn't look up. He just scribbled something on the paper, pushed it across the table, and said, "Sign here, son." And just like that, I wasn't a boy anymore. The pen shook in my hand. It wasn't guilt that made it tremble. Not yet. It was excitement. That wild, unstoppable kind that makes you forget every warning you've ever heard. The kind that makes a kid believe he's invincible. Outside, the streets were filled with posters, men smiling in uniforms. Words like glory and honor painted in bold, red letters. My friends back home said I was lucky, that I'd get to see the world, make a name for myself, maybe even become a hero. No one told me that heroes don't sleep through the night. The man at the desk stamped my form and handed me a small card with my name. Private Samuel Lewis. That wasn't even my full name. They'd shortened it for space, like trimming off a part of me that no longer mattered. When I stepped outside, I could smell the ocean. The wind carried the sound of seagulls and the low hum of engines from the harbor. I remember thinking that I'd never seen anything more alive, and that maybe neither had my mother. She used to say the world was too big for dreams like mine. "Sam," she'd say, "the world doesn't need another brave boy. It needs men who live long enough to tell their stories." But I didn't want to live long. Not then. I wanted to matter. The day I left, I didn't tell her. She thought I was walking to the market. I can still see her standing by the window, waving, not knowing it was goodbye. The guilt didn't come until the train started moving, and I saw the town fading behind the smoke. That's when I realized she'd wake up tomorrow to an empty bed and a note that said, "Don't worry, I'll be back soon." But soon, in war, doesn't mean what it does back home. The train was packed with men, boys really, trying to look older than they were. Some had faces too young for the shadows in their eyes. They joked, smoked, shared stories about girls, cars, and the futures they thought waited for them. I laughed too, because if you don't laugh, you start thinking. And thinking is dangerous when you're heading somewhere you might not come back from. When we reached the camp, the air smelled of mud, gun oil, and fear. It was colder than I expected, the kind of cold that bites through wool and skin alike. A sergeant with a voice like gravel barked our names and ages. I kept my chin high when he got to me. 18, sir. He didn't question it. Maybe he didn't care. Or maybe he'd stopped trying to tell boys from men a long time ago. That night, I lay in a tent with 6 others, staring at the canvas roof. The wind made it ripple like a heartbeat. The man beside me, a red-haired kid named Daniel, whispered, "First time away from home?" "Yeah." "Scared?" I thought about lying again, but the truth slipped out before I could stop it. "A little." He smiled in the dark. "Good. Means you're still human." He fell asleep soon after. I didn't. I listened to the sounds, boots crunching outside, distant gunfire drills, and the faint whistle of someone playing harmonica. I remember thinking that I'd stepped into a different world, one where time didn't move forward, just deeper. In the morning, they shaved our heads and handed us uniforms. Mine hung off my shoulders like a borrowed life. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see myself. I saw someone pretending to be brave, someone trying too hard to grow up. Training was a blur, mud, shouting, aching muscles, but there was something intoxicating about it. The unity, the rhythm, the illusion that we were all the same. At night, I'd write letters I never sent. To my mother, I'd start with, "I'm fine," then stop, because fine isn't a word that means much in a place built to break people. Weeks passed, and the rumor started spreading. We were shipping out to Europe. Hitler had pushed too far, and now, so would we. The night before we left, I dreamed of home, of my mother's kitchen, the smell of bread, the warmth of her hands as she brushed my hair. I woke up crying, quietly, so no one would hear. Boys don't cry in war. When the transport ship finally set sail, the ocean stretched endless and black. The men cheered when the coastline disappeared, but I couldn't. I kept thinking, if I die out there, will she even know where to find me? The sea had its own kind of silence. Not peaceful, just heavy. The kind that makes your thoughts echo. One evening, Daniel found me on deck, staring at the horizon. "You ever think about what it'll be like?" he asked. "What, when we get there?" I shrugged. "They say it's about defending freedom." He chuckled. "Freedom? I think it's about surviving the next day." We stood in silence after that, the waves slapping against the hull like a heartbeat. When we landed in England, everything felt gray. The sky, the streets, even the faces. They called it the staging ground, but it felt more like a waiting room for ghosts. That's where I met Captain Harlow. He was older, calm, the kind of man whose voice didn't need to be loud to be heard. He looked at me longer than anyone else had. "You're young," he said finally. I swallowed hard. 18, sir." He didn't argue. He just nodded. "Make sure you stay that way." I didn't know what he meant then. I do now. He wasn't talking about age. He was talking about what war does to your soul. The weeks dragged on. Training drills, rations, letters censored before they left camp. Every night, I'd pull my dog tag from under my shirt and read my fake birth date. August 10th, 1922. My real one was 3 years later. That little piece of metal was both my armor and my curse. One evening, news spread through camp. The invasion was coming. Normandy. We didn't know when, just soon. The officers stopped smiling. The laughter in the tents grew quieter. Daniel stopped humming his songs. I stopped writing letters altogether. The night before we moved out, Captain Harlow called us together. "Tomorrow," he said, "the world will change. Some of you will live to see it, some won't. But remember, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway." His words didn't make me brave. They just made the fear real. When I lay down that night, I thought about the lie that brought me here. The one sentence that turned me from a child into a soldier. 18, sir. If I'd told the truth, I might have been home that night. I might have been safe. I might have been her son, instead of a number on a roster. But I wasn't. And when dawn came, and the engines roared, I realized something I hadn't before. You don't become a man when you fight. You become one when you understand what your choices cost. And mine was only just beginning to cost me. The engines roared before the sun did. The air was thick with diesel and prayer. Every breath heavy with the weight of something coming. None of us spoke much that morning. Some were writing letters, others whispering to their God. I didn't write or pray. I just stared at my hands. The hands of a boy who'd lied his way into hell. They called it Operation Overlord. But for us, it was just the day we stopped being people. The day we became numbers. Faces behind helmets. Names written in chalk on the side of boats that might never return. Daniel sat beside me on the landing craft. He looked pale, his freckles lost in the fog. He clutched the rosary his sister had given him. "You ever wonder," he whispered, "if we'll actually make it back?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to be that kind of friend, but I couldn't lie again. Not this time. "I don't know," I said. He nodded like he already knew the answer. The sea was angry that morning. Waves slammed against the sides of the craft, spraying cold salt in our faces. The sky hung low and gray, and the horizon looked like it was holding its breath. Somewhere out there was France, and death. When the ramp dropped, the world exploded. Bullets tore through the air like screaming bees. Men fell before they even touched the water. I jumped, the shock of the cold slicing through me like a blade. My pack dragged me down, and for a moment, I thought maybe that was it. Maybe I'd die right there, nameless, in the sea. But instinct took over. I kicked, clawed my way to the surface, and gasped for air thick with smoke and gunpowder. "Move, move," someone yelled, but their voice was swallowed by the chaos. All I could see were bodies, floating, sinking, screaming. The sand ahead looked close, but it felt like miles. When I finally hit the beach, my hands were bleeding from the gravel. I pressed myself against a metal barrier, gasping. Daniel was beside me, eyes wide. breath ragged. He laughed, a wild, broken sound. We made it! And then he didn't. A shell landed yards away. The blast threw me back, ears ringing, sand in my mouth, his blood on my face. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember crying. I just remember the ringing. That endless, high-pitched ringing that drowned out the world. Hours passed like seconds. We pushed forward, step by step, through mud and fire and death. When it was finally over, the beach looked like a graveyard that hadn't decided to bury its dead yet. That night, I sat among the bodies. The air still smelled of iron and smoke. My rifle was empty, but I held it anyway. It felt like the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Someone walked by, handing out cigarettes. I took one, even though I'd never smoked. The smoke burned my throat, but the pain felt grounding. That's when I realized war isn't loud. It's the silence after that kills you. They said we'd won the beach, but all I could see was loss. Daniel's helmet lay half buried in the sand, a single bullet hole through the side. I wanted to bury it. I wanted to bury him, but there was no time. We had to move inland. The next weeks blurred together. Mud, rain, exhaustion. We slept in ditches, ate when we could, and tried not to think too much. Thinking was dangerous. Thinking meant remembering. One night, we took shelter in what used to be a farmhouse. The roof was half gone, the walls pocked with holes. Captain Harlow sat by a small fire, his face lit in flickering orange. He looked at me and said, "You did good out there, Lewis." I didn't feel good. I didn't feel anything. He must have seen it in my face because he added quietly, "It never leaves you, you know, the first one." I looked at him. The first what? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The next morning, we buried the ones who hadn't made it through the night. No priest, no ceremony. Just names whispered into the dirt. That's when it hit me. I didn't even know Daniel's middle name. He died beside me, and I didn't know a thing about the life he lost. As we moved further inland, the world changed. Villages burned, fields were empty, and the faces of the people we passed looked hollow. War wasn't glory. It was absence. The absence of laughter, of warmth, of life. I started writing again, letters I'd never send. "Dear Mom," I lied. I said I was 18, but I was 15. I thought it made me brave. But brave isn't what you think it is. Brave is watching your friends die and still moving forward. Brave is wanting to run, but choosing to stay. Every word I wrote felt like a confession to a God I wasn't sure believed me anymore. One evening, we reached a small French town. The church was gone, the air thick with dust. A woman stepped out of a doorway, holding a child. She looked at us, not with gratitude, but fear, like she'd seen too many soldiers to trust any of them anymore. Captain Harlow gave her some rations and told her we were there to help. She didn't say thank you. She just nodded, eyes empty. That night, I couldn't sleep, because I realized something terrible. To her, we weren't saviors. We were just another wave in a sea of destruction. A week later, I killed a man for the first time. He came out of the woods firing. My reflexes acted before my thoughts did. One shot, center chest. He fell, and for a second, the world went completely still. When I walked over, I saw his face. He was young, maybe my age, maybe younger. His helmet rolled off, revealing hair just like mine. I dropped my rifle and stepped back, shaking. Captain Harlow put a hand on my shoulder. "You did what you had to do." But I didn't feel like I'd done something right. I felt like something inside me had cracked, something that wouldn't heal. That night, I couldn't eat. I couldn't even look at my hands. I washed them over and over in a bucket of muddy water. But no matter how hard I scrubbed, I still saw the blood. Days turned into weeks. Every town looked the same. Shattered glass, broken windows, faces that didn't smile anymore. We lost more men. Some to bullets, some to exhaustion, some to silence. The silence was the worst. It crept in at night, whispering through the tents, reminding you of every face you'd seen fade away. One evening, I found a photo in an abandoned house. A family, a father, mother, 2 kids. smiling. Ordinary. I kept it in my pocket. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself what the world used to look like. A few days later, we were ambushed. Machine gun fire ripped through the trees. We dove for cover. I remember the dirt hitting my face. The sound of someone screaming, not from pain, but panic. When it was over, there were only 4 of us left standing. Captain Harlow was bleeding from his leg, but he refused to sit down. "We keep moving," he said. We carried him for miles until we found shelter in a ruined barn. The rain leaked through the roof. He looked at me and said, "You lied, didn't you?" My heart stopped. "What? Your age? You're not 18. I didn't answer. He smiled faintly. "Didn't think so." He leaned back, closing his eyes. "You're just a kid, Sam. You shouldn't be here." "I wanted to help," I said. He opened his eyes again, tired but kind. "Then help me live." We did our best to patch him up, but infection doesn't care about good intentions. By morning, he was gone. I buried him myself. No words, no cross, just a helmet on the ground and silence heavy enough to crush me. When I stood up, I looked at the horizon and realized something. I'd lied to become a man, but all war had done was take my childhood and give me guilt in return. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I knew I couldn't stop now. Because if I stopped, then every lie, every death, every step would have been for nothing. So I kept walking, and that's when I saw it. The sky burning in the distance. The sound of thunder that wasn't thunder. The front line was moving, and I was walking straight into it. The ground was shaking long before I reached the front again. The air smelled like smoke and wet earth, and every explosion painted the horizon orange. My boots were soaked through, my uniform stiff with mud and sweat. There were fewer of us now, just scattered remnants of a platoon that had once felt unbreakable. We didn't talk much anymore. Words had lost their meaning. The only language that mattered now was survival. The way your eyes met someone's in the dark. A nod that said, "We're still here." We reached a ruined village near Caen, just as the rain started again. The sky wept like it had seen too much. I found shelter in what used to be a bakery. The air still faintly smelled of burnt bread. I leaned against the cracked wall and closed my eyes, trying to remember what warmth felt like. Then, I saw her, a girl, maybe 15, same as me when I'd lied my way into this nightmare. She was crouched in the corner, clutching a loaf of stale bread. Her eyes were wide, frightened, but not of me, of everything. She didn't speak English, and my French was terrible, but fear needs no translation. I lowered my rifle, held out my hands. "It's okay," I whispered. "Je ne vais pas te faire de mal. I won't hurt you." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. I tore a piece of my ration and handed it to her. She took it, ate it like someone who hadn't eaten in days, maybe weeks. Her name was Elise. Her parents were gone, taken, killed. She didn't know which. She'd been hiding alone in the rubble for days. For a moment, I forgot about the war. For a moment, it was just 2 kids sharing what little was left of the world. But then, the shelling started again. The first blast shook the walls. She screamed, dropping the bread. I grabbed her hand and pulled her into the cellar, just as another explosion hit. Dust rained down, the ceiling groaning above us. In that dark, cramped space, she clung to me like I was something more than a scared boy, pretending to be a soldier. When it finally stopped, the silence was worse than the noise. We crawled out hours later. The bakery was gone, flattened, smoldering. The streets were unrecognizable. I told her to come with me. She shook her head. "Je reste," she said softly. "I stay." I wanted to argue, to tell her the world was too cruel for her to face alone. But maybe she already knew that better than I did. I left her there, standing among the ruins, the smoke curling around her like ghosts. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing her face, those eyes, not afraid of death, but of being forgotten. I realized that's what we all feared most. Not dying, just being erased. Days blurred into weeks again. We moved, fought, buried, repeated. Every victory felt hollow. Every sunrise brought a new list of names. One morning, we reached a forest outside St. Lo. The trees were blackened, branches like twisted bones. We were ordered to clear out what was left of the enemy. It was supposed to be routine, Nothing about war is routine. We advanced quietly, rifles up, hearts pounding. The forest was too quiet. Even the birds had fled. I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, a crack. A single shot. Johnson fell first. Then Reed. Chaos erupted. Bullets tore through leaves. Men screamed. I dropped behind a tree, mud splashing my face. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started. Then a voice called out. German. Young. I couldn't understand it all, but I caught one word. Bitte. Please. Slowly, I peeked from behind the trunk. He couldn't have been older than 16. Blonde hair, terrified eyes, rifle shaking in his hands. We stared at each other, two boys pretending to be soldiers, both too scared to shoot again. He said something, voice trembling. I didn't answer. My finger tightened on the trigger, and then I saw it. A photo falling from his pocket. A woman, smiling, holding a baby. My rifle lowered. For a moment, everything stopped. The war, the noise, the orders, all gone. Just two kids, who never asked for any of this. But behind me, someone shouted. A shot rang out. The boy dropped. When I turned, it was Miller. He spat on the ground. He'd have killed you, Sam. Don't go soft. I wanted to punch him, scream at him, tell him that maybe softness was the only thing keeping us human. But I said nothing, because deep down I knew, in this place, kindness could get you killed. That night, I sat alone, staring at my hands again. Every line on my palms looked like a story I didn't want to remember. I pulled out the photo I'd found weeks ago, the family from the house. I placed it next to the German boy's picture. Different sides, same tragedy. The war didn't care who you were. It just collected souls. A few days later, we got new orders. Push forward toward the Seine. Hitler's on his heels, our commander said. One last push. We'd heard that before. It never was the last. We crossed through fields that used to feed families. Now they just fed the crows. The smell of rot clung to everything. At one point, we passed a burned-out convoy. Inside one of the trucks was a child's doll, half melted, one glass eye missing. I stared at it too long. Miller noticed. You looking to save that too? He said, smirking. I didn't answer, just kept walking. That night, I dreamt of my mother. She was standing by the window of our house, sunlight pouring over her face. She looked younger, alive. Sam, she said softly, why did you lie? I tried to speak, but no words came out. She smiled, sad and distant. You can't bring me peace by killing, son. When I woke up, I was crying. I hadn't cried since Daniel. I didn't even know I still could. The next morning, as the fog lifted, we reached the river. The bridge ahead was blown. We'd have to cross on foot through shallow water. Easy, they said. But nothing about war is easy. Halfway through, the snipers opened fire. The first bullet hit the man beside me. The second hit Miller. He didn't even scream, just dropped face first into the current. We dove behind rocks. Mud and water splashed everywhere. The captain yelled orders, but the words were lost in the chaos. I crawled forward, inch by inch, until I could see the flash of their rifles across the bank. I raised mine and fired. One shot, two, three, then silence. When we finally reached the other side, my legs were shaking, my rifle was hot, my ears rang again. That same endless ringing that never left me. We'd taken the bridge. We'd lost half our men. That night, we burned their letters. Not out of disrespect, but because we couldn't bear to carry their words anymore. As the flames danced, I thought about what I'd tell my mother if I ever saw her again. Maybe that I'd done my best. Maybe that I was sorry for every lie, every bullet, every face I couldn't save. But most of all, I'd tell her the truth. That war doesn't make heroes. It just teaches boys how to die quietly. The next day, we kept moving. I'd stopped counting how many days it had been, how many miles, how many names. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in puddles, the dirt, the stubble, the hollow eyes, and I wouldn't recognize myself. Then one morning, we got word. Paris had been liberated. Cheers went up. Guns fired in the air. Men hugged each other like it was over, but it didn't feel over. Not to me, because deep down I knew the war might end, but the guilt never would. And as the sun rose over the broken fields of France, I realized something that made my stomach twist. I'd lied to fight evil, but in doing so, I'd become a small part of it. When the news spread that Paris was free, the world seemed to exhale all at once. Men shouted, laughed, even cried. Some grabbed bottles of wine they'd found abandoned in the rubble and drank until they couldn't stand. I should have felt something too. Joy, relief, pride. But instead, I felt empty. We marched into the city a few days later. The streets were lined with people cheering, waving flags, throwing flowers. I remember a girl, no older than my sister had been, running up and kissing one of the men on the cheek. He blushed like a boy again. Cameras clicked, the world's eyes capturing liberation like a photograph that would outlive the truth. Because the truth was messier. Behind the smiles, there were hollow eyes. Behind every cheer, an echo of someone who hadn't lived to see it. I walked through the crowd, rifle slung over my shoulder, the weight of it dragging my body down. People tried to hand me bread, fruit, cigarettes. I took nothing. My stomach was tight, my throat dry. I couldn't celebrate. I didn't deserve to. We set up camp near the river that night. The city glowed behind us, alive again. I sat by the water, watching my reflection ripple. I looked older than I had any right to. 17 now by number, but ancient by what I'd seen. Captain Reeves came by, half drunk, half broken. "Hell of a day, huh, Sam?" he said, lighting a cigarette. The glow of it flickered across his tired face. "World's changing." I nodded. "Doesn't feel like it." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "It never does." He offered me the cigarette. I shook my head. He looked at me a long time, then said, "You ever think about what comes next?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know, because I couldn't imagine a world that didn't sound like gunfire. He sighed, stood up, and patted my shoulder. "Get some rest, kid. Tomorrow we keep moving east, toward Germany, toward whatever was left of Hitler's dream, and the nightmare we were ordered to end." That night, I couldn't sleep. The river murmured softly, like it was whispering secrets. I thought about my mother again. Her hands, always busy. Her voice, soft even when she was angry. I used to tell her I'd make her proud one day. Now I wondered if she'd even recognize the person I'd become. The next morning, we moved. The cheering crowds faded behind us, replaced again by silence and smoke. The roads were filled with refugees, families pushing carts, carrying children, walking away from everything they'd ever known. Some looked at us with hope. I couldn't tell if it was sleeping or gone. I didn't want to know. War teaches you to stop asking questions you don't want the answers to. Weeks passed. The rain came and went. We slept where we could, ate what we found, marched toward places no one remembered the names of. Each mile made me feel heavier, like the earth itself was trying to pull me down. One afternoon, we came across an abandoned farmhouse. Inside were signs of a family that had left in a hurry. Half-eaten bread, a table still set for dinner, a child's toy lying on the floor. I picked up the toy. It was a small wooden soldier, missing one arm. For a moment, I stared at it, wondering if the boy who'd left it behind had pretended he was a hero too. I pocketed it. I don't know why. Maybe I thought holding on to something innocent might keep a piece of me from dying. That night, as we camped near the forest, we heard singing. Soft, foreign, beautiful, a German lullaby. Miller cursed under his breath. "Bastards," he said, reaching for his rifle. But Reeves raised a hand. "Stand down," he ordered. "It's just civilians." We waited, listening. The song drifted through the trees, carried by the wind. It reminded me of something my mother used to hum when I couldn't sleep. The melody wrapped around my chest, squeezed until it hurt. Reeves finally said, "All right, boys, let's check it out." We moved slowly through the trees, boots silent against the wet ground. The singing grew louder. When we broke through the clearing, we saw them. 3 women and 2 children, huddled by a small fire. Their faces were gaunt, their clothes torn. The oldest woman looked up, startled when she saw us. She froze. Reeves lowered his weapon. "It's all right," he said gently. We're not here to hurt you." She didn't understand the words, but the tone carried. She nodded. One of the little boys peeked from behind her skirt. He couldn't have been older than 10. He stared at me with wide, curious eyes. I smiled weakly, then pulled the wooden soldier from my pocket and held it out to him. His face lit up. He took it carefully, like it was gold. For a moment, everything felt still, human, real. Then in the distance, artillery roared again. The women flinched. The boy clutched the toy. Reeves turned to us. "Move out," he said softly. "Leave them be." We did. But that lullaby followed me long after the sound faded. Days later, we reached the border. The air felt colder, heavier. You could almost feel Germany breathing on the other side. Reeves gathered us. "This is it," he said. "The last push. Hitler's cornered. You make it through this, you make it home. Home." The word didn't mean much anymore. We crossed at dawn. The first village was abandoned. Smoke still curled from chimneys. Doors left swinging. The silence was unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. Reeves told us to stay alert. But as we got closer, the smell hit us. Thick, sweet, rotting. Flies buzzed in swarms. Crows circled above. We didn't understand at first. We thought it was another battlefield, until we saw them. Bodies. Piles of them. Men, women, children. Skin and bones. Hollow eyes, staring at nothing. Someone gagged behind me. Another man dropped his rifle. I just stood there, frozen, unable to breathe. A soldier from another unit walked up. "You boys just got here?" he asked quietly. His face was pale. "Welcome to hell." We moved through the camp in silence. The survivors, if you could call them that, were ghosts. They looked at us with fear and disbelief, like we were just another cruel trick. One woman reached out and grabbed my sleeve. Her fingers were thin as twigs. She said something in a language I didn't know, then pressed a small, dirty photograph into my hand. A child, smiling. Maybe hers, maybe gone. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and whispered, "I'm sorry." That night I sat outside the fence, staring at the stars. For the first time, I didn't feel like a soldier. I felt like a liar. A child wearing a dead man's uniform. I'd lied to fight Hitler, to be brave, to make my mother proud. But all I'd done was walk through a world that no longer believed in forgiveness. Reeves sat beside me, silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, "You're too young for this, Sam." I almost laughed. "You think?" He looked at me. "No, I mean really too young." His eyes narrowed. "How old are you, son?" I froze. My throat tightened. I could have lied again. I almost did. But for once, the words wouldn't come. 15, I said finally. "Well, 16 now." He stared at me, like I'd just shot him. Christ almighty. "I wanted to help," I said, voice shaking. "I wanted to do something that mattered." He ran a hand through his hair, sighed. "Kid, you've done more than enough." Then he stood up and walked away, his silhouette disappearing into the dark. I sat there until dawn, the photograph still in my hand. The sun rose slowly, bleeding light over the ruined earth, and I realized something I'd never let myself think before. The boy who'd lied to fight Hitler had died somewhere along the way, and all that was left was someone trying to understand why. When the gunfire stopped, it didn't happen all at once. It faded, slowly, like a storm that had finally exhausted itself. At first, no one believed it. The men kept their heads low, their fingers tight around their rifles, waiting for the echo that always came after silence, but it never came. The radio crackled that morning. Static, a pause, then a trembling voice. "The Führer is dead. Germany has surrendered." The words hung in the air. Nobody cheered. Nobody moved. We just looked at each other, eyes hollow, waiting for the world to start making sense again. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel anything. Just the weight of it. The realization that everything we'd done, everything we'd seen, all the death and fire and fear, was finally over. And yet, somehow, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a void. The next day, we marched into a small German town. No one came out to greet us. Curtains fluttered behind cracked windows. The streets were quiet, except for the creak of boots and the distant hum of flies. I saw a boy about my age, or what I'd pretended to be when I joined, standing in a doorway. His uniform was too big for him. He didn't have a weapon, just stared at us, pale and trembling. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw myself in him. The same lie, the same desperation to prove something. Reeves motioned for us to move on. We did, but that boy's face stayed with me. That night, the men got drunk. They sang, shouted, cried. Someone found a record player in one of the houses and played jazz. It sounded foreign, too alive for the ghosts that surrounded us. Miller threw his arm around me and laughed. "You did it, kid. You survived." I smiled weakly, pretending, because survival didn't feel like winning. Later, when everyone had passed out or fallen asleep, I slipped outside. The moonlight washed over the empty town, turning everything silver and still. I walked without knowing where I was going, until I reached a small church on the hill. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was cold and dusty. The altar was cracked, the pews broken. I walked to the front and sat down. For a long time, I just stared at the candle that someone had left burning near a statue of Mary. I didn't pray. I didn't know how to anymore. I just whispered, "I'm sorry." For my mother, for the friends I'd lost, for the boy I'd stopped being. The candle flickered. Outside, the wind howled. When I left the church, Reeves was waiting for me by the door. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, his face hidden in shadow. Then he said quietly, "War's over, Sam. You can go home now." Home. The word felt strange, distant, like something from another life. He handed me a folded piece of paper. "You're being discharged, honorably. I didn't tell them about your age." I looked up, surprised. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because you've done enough lying. And because you earned this, the hard way." I tried to speak, but my throat closed. All I could do was nod. 2 weeks later, I was on a train heading west. The landscape outside the window was a blur of fields and smoke, towns half burned, people trying to rebuild. Every mile felt heavier. I should have been happy to be leaving, but the further I got from the front, the more lost I felt. At one stop, a nurse came through the car handing out bread and water. She smiled at me, soft and tired. "Heading home, soldier?" I nodded. "Yeah." She looked at me a moment longer, as if she could see the truth in my eyes, then said quietly, "Welcome back." When the train finally reached the harbor, I stood on the deck of a ship, watching the shore fade behind me. The sea stretched out endless and gray. I thought about the boys who'd never make this trip, about the ones still lying in the dirt of places that didn't even have names anymore. When I landed back home, everything felt smaller. The streets I'd once known looked foreign, like they belonged to someone else. People smiled, waved, thanked me for my service. I just nodded and kept walking. When I reached my house, the front door was open. My mother was in the garden, kneeling by the flowers. Her hair had more gray in it now. Her hands still moved the same way, steady, patient. I froze at the gate. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, she looked up. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She ran to me and wrapped her arms around me, so tight, it almost hurt. I felt her shaking. Maybe she was crying. Maybe I was. I don't know. When she finally pulled back, she looked at my face like she was trying to read a map of everything I'd been through. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You've changed." I nodded. "So have you." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my old bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. It was the kind of silence I used to dream about in the trenches, but now it felt unbearable. I kept hearing echoes, gunfire, screams, laughter. The past doesn't end when the war does. It follows you home. In the morning, I went to the local school. Kids were running outside, shouting, playing. I watched them from the fence, their laughter sharp and innocent. One of them looked about my age when I'd first lied to enlist. He was chasing a ball, his face flushed with life. And I thought, that's what 15 should look like. When I got home, My mother handed me a letter. It was from Captain Reeves. The handwriting was rough, uneven. He wrote, "We did good, kid. The world's trying to forget, but I won't. You were the youngest soldier I ever met, and one of the bravest. Don't let what you saw eat you alive. You deserve to live. For all the ones who can't." I read it twice. Then, I folded it and placed it in a box, beside the photograph the woman had given me in the camp. The days turned into weeks. I tried to go back to normal, helped my mother, worked odd jobs, walked by the river where I used to fish, but nothing felt the same. The boy who'd once dreamed of heroism was gone, buried under the weight of things he'd seen but could never tell. One evening, I sat by the water, the sunset painting the sky in shades of red and gold. I pulled the wooden toy soldier from my pocket, the one I'd given to that German boy, and somehow found again when I left. I stared at it for a long time. The missing arm, the faded paint, it was all still there, but it didn't feel broken anymore. It felt real, honest, like me. I whispered to the river, "It's over," but I knew it never truly would be, because war doesn't end with peace treaties. It ends when the last memory fades, and some never do. Years later, people would ask me what it was like, fighting in that war. I'd smile, tell them I was too young to remember much. But in quiet moments, when no one was around, I'd still see the faces, the friends, the strangers, the lost. And I'd remember the boy who lied his way into hell because he thought that's what courage meant. And maybe, in a way, it was. Because sometimes courage isn't about fighting. It's about surviving, about coming home, about learning to live again, when the war inside you never really ends. The world moved on. It always does. Wars end, soldiers go home, medals rust, and names fade. But for me, it never really ended. I built a life, or at least something that looked like one. Got a job, bought a small house, even learned to smile when people asked about the old days. Sometimes I'd tell them funny stories about the rations, the mud, the jokes we told to keep from crying. But I never told them about Tommy. I never told them that I was 15 when I watched him die, that I was a child pretending to be a man, and that the war believed me. The papers called us heroes, but heroes don't wake up at 3 a.m. because they hear a rifle bolt in their dreams. Heroes don't flinch when kids light firecrackers in the street. Heroes don't forget their own birthdays, but remember every face they saw die. No, we were just boys who wanted to matter, and in the end, that's all it took to destroy us. I visit the memorial every year. It's quiet there, the kind of quiet that hums in your bones. Rows of names carved into stone, too many to count. I trace my fingers over Tommy's name, and then over my own, because in some ways, the boy I was, the one who lied about his age, he died there too, buried somewhere in the mud of France, under a false name and a borrowed uniform. A young reporter once asked me if I regretted it. Lying, fighting, going to war. I told him no, but the truth is, every time I see a 15-year-old boy laugh, or run, or dream, I wish I'd had the courage to stay home, to grow up slow, to let the world be cruel without trying to fix it with a gun. I used to think bravery meant charging into battle. Now I know. Real bravery is surviving it, and carrying the memories of those who didn't. So, if you ever stand at a war memorial, if you see a name carved in stone and think, he must have been a man, look closer. Sometimes, it's just a boy who lied about his age, because he thought the world needed saving. And maybe, in some small, tragic way, he was right.